Hello everyone and welcome along to this TSG webinar. My name is Grant Campbell. I'm a Senior Technical Specialist here at TSG, specialising in security products, and today I'm going to talk to you about Intercept X, a new product from Sophos that takes malware protection on your devices to a new level. Now, I'm personally quite excited. We're all quite excited here at TSG about Intercept X, as thanks to Sophos we now have a product that can protect against the new generation of threats, not the least of which is the big one I'm pretty sure we're all aware of these days, and that's ransomware. That being malware that infects your machine, encrypts your files, and demands you pay the attacker money to have them unlocked. Now, up until now, we've had no particularly effective method of detecting and stopping such attacks, as due to their very nature, traditional antivirus software struggles to detect and deal with them. But now, thanks to Sophos, we have a product in Intercept X that can do exactly that. I'll just talk briefly through what we're going to be going over today. I will start off very quickly just having a chat about TSG and Sophos for those of you who may not already be familiar with TSG or Sophos. Then I'll chat about why we need a new approach to endpoint security. Now, I'll mention the phrase endpoint security quite often throughout this webinar. Know that when I do, all I really mean is the antivirus software that sits on your desktops, laptops, servers, etc. I'll then talk about the capabilities of Intercept X. What does it actually do to protect you against these next generation threats, before running through a brief demo of the software in action. I'll also talk briefly about your deployment options and give you some sample costs. And just before we close, I'll talk by means of a real life example of the fallout businesses can face as the result of a ransomware attack. Let's get started. TSG take your security very seriously. We partner with some of the industry's leading vendors to bring you best in breed products that touch every possible security requirement you may have. We're a Microsoft Gold partner with 7 gold competencies. We partner with Datto and Backup Technology, who provide us with online backup and disaster recovery solutions. Veritas provides us with an on-premise backup product, and Symantec, our cloud-based email security. Not least amongst these relationships is Sophos. We at TSG are one of only 2 Sophos Platinum level partners in the UK, and we have more Sophos trained staff than any other UK reseller. From our help desk team to our field engineers right through to our sales staff, we have the expertise and training to ably supply and support these solutions. In short, when it comes to your security, TSG has you covered. TSG have partnered with Sophos almost since our inception 13 years ago, and we enjoy a very close working relationship with them. This graph on the left of this slide here was only very recently released by Forrester Research. Now, they are an independent research and analysis organisation who specialise in providing advice on IT technology. Now, this graph evaluates, in their eyes, Sophos' ability when it comes to endpoint protection, specifically about the antivirus software that sits on your servers and your workstations. And it is based on 3 criteria: the software's ability to prevent exploits from executing, to detect malicious activity, and to remediate and contain that malicious activity. Now, if we look at Sophos' position on the graph over here on the right, you will see that in terms of strategy, Forrester evaluate them to have the most developed strategy when it comes to endpoint security of any vendor in the sector. They also sit high on the current offering axis, telling us that not only do they have the strategy, they also have the product stack to deliver that strategy. They sit comfortably in the leaders section and amongst some rather lofty competition amongst Symantec, Intel, Trend, etc. I hope what this shows you is that Sophos are, to say the least, a significant force in the industry. So what has changed over the years that has got us to the point where we need to reevaluate our approach to endpoint security? There are a number of reasons, 2 of which I've listed here. First is the increased attack surface. You go back 10, 15 years, your staff had a PC at their feet, and perhaps that was their only ingress point into your corporate network. Now it wouldn't be unusual for someone to have their PC at their desk and a phone in their bag or in their pocket, as well as perhaps a PC at home that they use to remote access into your corporate network when they're working from home. So rather than having one device, it wouldn't be unusual for a member of staff to have 3 devices, maybe even more. Each device that accesses your corporate network is a potential ingress point for a malicious attack. So whereas a few years ago, if you had 10 staff, 10 PCs, you could have 10 staff now and 30, 40 devices amongst that staff base accessing your corporate network. That is your increased attack surface. We also need to recognise the fact that the threats we face are far more sophisticated now than they used to be. It is not unusual for an attack now, a piece of malicious code to land on your machine, and not content just with doing damage, it can make contact with an off-premise server. It could be anywhere in the world in order to coordinate its activities, to pass data out of your network. New generation malware also is what we call polymorphic, or it can be polymorphic. It has the ability to change its shape, to change the way it behaves in an attempt to evade traditional antivirus. So that's what we're talking about, advanced malware. When we talk about advanced malware, quite often these days we're talking about ransomware. The malicious code that can get onto your network, encrypt your files, and as we said, demand money to get your files back. That sort of attack was unthinkable 10 years ago, when your average virus was just content with getting onto your machine and causing a bit of havoc. We also have a thing called an exploit. Now, every bit of software that we use in our day-to-day lives, whether it be Microsoft Word, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Windows itself, is flawed. Every bit of software contains numerous flaws, which when they're identified can be used by someone with malicious intent to make that software do something it wasn't designed to do. In the case of these attackers, often what they use these exploits to do is to make this software, via the flaw in the software, bypass your security to allow the actual malicious software in. The exploit is essentially the door that is opened to allow malicious software in. We need to be able to stop these exploits. If we stop the exploits, we stop the really bad stuff even getting onto your machine in the first place. We talk about zero-day exploits. I'll talk a bit just now about how traditional antivirus works. Broadly speaking, traditional antivirus maintains what we call a signature file, which is a small database of known threats, which is constantly updated via the updates that you download from your antivirus vendor. Which begs the question, if an exploit or a bit of malicious code is released into the wild and the antivirus vendors haven't seen it, but it lands on your machine, how does your traditional antivirus deal with that? If, largely speaking, it can only deal with threats it has prior knowledge of. The answer is, in many cases, it can't. Now, as well as these threats, we also have the issue of limited visibility. Once we've been victim of an attack, wouldn't it be nice to go back and see how the attack got in, what it did, to allow us to educate ourselves on how to better protect against these attacks in future, and just to see what it touched when it was in, to make sure that when we're remediating the damage done, that we're not missing anything. Now, I talked briefly on the previous slide about the ability for next generation malware to communicate with off-site servers in order to coordinate its actions and to perhaps steal data from your network. This level of coordination is something that has been lacking from the systems that we deploy to protect you against such attack. We can put a firewall in place, email security. We can install antivirus on your servers and workstations. And that's great. This layered approach will protect you to a high level. But wouldn't it be nice if those layers of protection, your firewall, your endpoint security, your email security, were actually exchanging threat data constantly throughout the day and informing each other of the status of every other part of your security? This is what Sophos has addressed with what they're calling synchronized security using the Sophos heartbeat. If you deploy a Sophos XG firewall and you have a Sophos endpoint managed in Sophos Central, that's Sophos's cloud-based management console, you can enable this security heartbeat, which allows your firewall and your endpoint to constantly throughout the day exchange small packets of data so that they can monitor the status of each other. An example of how this would benefit you, say your security software on your laptop, as we see down here on the right, had been compromised and a bit of malicious code had made it onto the machine. As soon as that happens, that heartbeat to the firewall on your network turns red. The firewall is made aware that there's an issue with that endpoint, and the firewall, based on the policies you set up, can shut down the internet connection and isolate that machine. Without this heartbeat, the firewall would have been completely oblivious. And for example, we talked before, malicious code trying to exchange data offsite would potentially have been allowed to happen. With the Sophos heartbeat, the firewall shuts down that connection. Now, the Sophos encryption software, Sophos Safeguard, also takes part in this synchronized security approach at the moment, and what we're hoping to see in future, that more Sophos products will start to take part in the synchronized security approach, until we ultimately, in an ideal world, get to the point where every bit of security software we use is constantly talking to each other in order to coordinate and better protect you against attack. So we've talked about the changing threat landscape, the fact that we've arrived at a point where the products we've relied on for years, the traditional antivirus, is no longer protecting us against this new generation of threats. We are at a point where we need to change the way we approach this problem. Attacks are coming from within the perimeter based on software exploits. We've talked about the fact that these flaws, these unpatched flaws in your software, if they remain unpatched, can be used to open a door and allow malicious code to run on your machine undetected. The slide says that ransomware damages have reached 1.2 billion. That figure varies wildly depending on where you look. I saw a report only the other day that revised that figure to closer to 75 billion. I'll give you some other facts and figures from a recent study that said 54% of UK businesses have experienced a ransomware attack in the previous 12 months. And these incidences of exploit attacks, as we've talked about, these attacks that aren't malicious in and of themselves, but do allow a door to be opened to let the bad stuff on. Those types of attacks have increased 259% in the last 5 months alone. And less than half of ransomware victims fully recover their data, even with backup. It's clear we need a new approach. And that new approach is Sophos Intercept X, exactly as the tagline says, a completely new approach to endpoint security. So what exactly does Sophos Intercept X do to mitigate these next generation threats? There are three main branches to Intercept X, which we'll go through in this slide, and I don't think it would be unfair to say that the anti-ransomware capabilities of Intercept X is the headline feature of the software. The anti-ransomware in Intercept X has the ability to detect and stop in its tracks malicious encryption. And by the way, it can tell the difference between legitimate encryption you may carry out using a product like Sophos Safeguard and malicious encryption started by a piece of malware on your machine. Typically, Sophos testing has told us that a ransomware attack is detected and stopped between 1 and 3 seconds after the encryption starts, and after no more than 3 to 7 files have been encrypted. Now you might think, oh, I don't want 3 to 7 files to be encrypted. Well, the good news is not only can Sophos Intercept X stop the encryption, it can roll back any files that were encrypted prior to the attack being detected and stopped. It maintains a rolling cache of your files, so that if some files are encrypted before an attack is detected, those files are restored with no interaction from the end user automatically. As soon as the attack is detected, any encrypted files are reverted to their original state. It also, you can see that it says identify source of attack. That actually speaks to a feature we'll talk about in a second. The second branch is anti-exploit. We've talked about these exploits. If we can shut them down, we can do a good job at preventing ransomware and other next-gen attacks from getting onto our machines in the first place. Now, how does anti-exploit work? We talked about how traditional antivirus uses signature files in order to identify and mitigate threats. Those signature files are essentially known attacks, known viruses, known malware. The takeaway is traditional antivirus needs to have prior knowledge of a type of attack in order to mitigate against that attack. Sophos Intercept X anti-exploit approaches things slightly differently. It uses behavioural analysis. The Sophos engineers have identified 24 techniques that are typical to all threats, and those techniques are what Intercept X anti-exploit is constantly on the lookout for. As soon as it sees one of those techniques being used, it shuts the process down. Signature files as used by traditional antivirus can grow and grow and grow. Traditional antivirus also has to scan every file you open, every process you run needs to be scanned. That signature file and that scanning process can have a system overhead, especially in older hardware. Intercept X, because it doesn't scan any files, it doesn't maintain any signature files, all it does is monitor behavior, and the techniques in use by the processes on the system is very, very low footprint. The performance overhead on any given machine is negligible until it actually springs into action in the event of an attack. Now, it's all very well having these measures that protect you against these next generation threats, but wouldn't it be nice after an attack, we touched on this briefly earlier, to be able to have some comprehensive intelligence to allow you to see what happened during the attack? Well, you're in luck. Root cause analysis in Intercept X gives you exactly that. This can allow TSG engineers or your own IT staff access to a readable, comprehensive threat analysis that shows the entire lifetime of the attack. It shows how it got in, what it touched when it was in, where it originated from, and it advises on remedial action. That remedial action will quite often involve running what you could describe as the fourth part of Intercept X, which is a product called Sophos Clean, which comes as part of the Intercept X bundle. Sophos Clean is a next generation on-demand scanner that you can run after an attack that hunts for and removes any trace of spyware and deeply embedded lingering malware to ensure that after an attack you are left with a clean bill of health. Now, it's worth making the point at this stage that Intercept X is not meant to replace your traditional antivirus. The threats that your traditional antivirus protects you against are still out there, and you still need to be protected against those. But Intercept X doesn't replace that. It augments it to protect against these new generation threats that the traditional antivirus struggles to deal with. Sophos themselves put it like this: if you imagine traditional antivirus to be the brakes on your bike, consider Intercept X to be your helmet. Your helmet greatly increases your protection, but the fact that you've got a helmet on doesn't mean you get rid of your brakes. So on to the demo. what we have here is Outlook open on the left hand side. On the right hand side we have a document folder open and also the Sophos Endpoint console. So we've got an email in from a chap called Campbell. He sounds like a trustworthy individual. He sent us a Word document and it says, urgent, latest widget pricing, please take a look at this and email me your thoughts by the end of the day. I know who this person is. This is entirely the kind of thing I can expect to receive from them. Looks entirely legitimate. So let's open that file up. Okay, so we've opened up the file and we see this yellow banner. I'm sure we all see that every day. So we click on enable editing. Uh-oh, error updating. Please try again later. And also the Sophos Endpoint console is showing a threat as having been detected, and we can see down at the bottom right, Sophos Endpoint Ransomware blocked in C tester2.exe. That doesn't sound too clever. And what's this? In our document folder, a bunch of our files have had their extensions changed to Hydra Crypt. That certainly doesn't look too clever. If I try to open one of those amended files, we get gobbledygook, which is exactly what you would expect to see from a file that has been encrypted, for which you don't have the key. Fortunately, as I said previously, Sophos Intercept X not only has detected and stopped the attack, but it has put the files that were encrypted back without any user interaction. So that file 001000 that was encrypted here has been put back, and we have the unencrypted version. So if we can look briefly now at Sophos Intercept X root cause analysis. As an IT admin, you not only want to know that your systems are protected, but you want to know that after an attack, you can have some means of analysing that attack to inform you how to perhaps do things differently later, but also to ensure that any damage that was done you know about, so that you can then go and remediate it. So this is root cause analysis in the Sophos Central Console. What we don't see here is the overview tab up at the top on the left there under the root cause analysis heading. What you see in there is just a very brief breakdown of what was detected, what machine originated the attack, which user was logged on at the time, when the attack occurred, and how it originated, for example, from Outlook or from a document open from a USB stick. And it also advises on what to do next. And mostly that what to do next will be to run Sophos clean. What we see here is the artifacts tab that tells us the touch points of that attack. We can see that 1,036 touch points, 24 business files, 274 other files, 6 processes, 718 registry keys, and 14 network connections. Bear in mind, the attack only lasted a few seconds before it was intercepted and stopped. Quite a lot of touch points for quite a short attack. If we move on to the visualize, we see, as we talked about briefly earlier on, this nice visual representation of the attack that we've just seen. This blue dot over here is what we call the beacon event. This is the point at which the attack was detected, convicted, and stopped. So we can see that beyond that attack, very little happened, because this is the point where it was stopped. But this allows you to trace back to the root event, the originating point, which this tells us was Outlook.exe. We already know that. We know that the attack came from a document opened from a spurious email. We can see everything that happened. The fact that Outlook wrote a number of files, it wrote a number of registry entries, it spawned some other files and another process which attempted to make a bunch of network connections, which spawned another process and another process, and ultimately the process that was responsible for the malicious encryption. If this is the level of disruption that can be caused by an attack that lasted only a few seconds, imagine you didn't have Intercept X and that tester2.exe, which kicked off the malicious encryption, was left to run and do its own thing for minutes or even hours before it was detected. Let's talk briefly about your deployment options. If you're using Sophos Endpoint Standard or Advanced at the moment, and that is managed on-premise, that is the console which controls and updates your Sophos endpoints, is installed on one of your services in your office, you must upgrade to Sophos Central Endpoint Advanced. That is Sophos's cloud-based antivirus. Similarly, if you're using Sophos Central Endpoint Standard, if you're already on Sophos Central but you're on the standard version, again, you must upgrade to the Advanced edition. Worth pointing out at this point, there will be a charge to upgrade to the Sophos Central Endpoint Advanced to allow you to then deploy Sophos Intercept X, but that charge will only be equal to the difference in cost between Sophos Central Endpoint Advanced, whatever you have now, for the remaining duration of your subscription. Really nice feature of Intercept X is that it doesn't require you to be using Sophos Endpoint as your existing antivirus product. If you're using antivirus from Trend, Symantec, McAfee or any other vendor, Intercept X will sit quite happily alongside it to afford you that next generation protection. If you, for example, are coming to the end of your subscription with one of these other vendors, why not renew with Sophos Central Endpoint Advanced and move all of your endpoint protection to Sophos? But as I said, you don't have to. You can deploy Sophos Intercept X quite happily alongside your existing non-Sophos solution, with one caveat: you lose the root cause analysis. You still get the anti-ransomware and the anti-exploit. You just lose that ability because you don't have that Sophos Central Cloud Console. You lose the ability to have the root cause analysis. Just to talk briefly about pricing, you can see just some sample costs for the Intercept X product here. Various user counts down the left hand side, and you can license the software on a 12, 24 or 36 month term with, as you can see there, a price break for licensing over a longer term. All prices are ex-VAT and do not include installation charges or, if required, as we talked about in the previous slide, an upgrade of your Sophos endpoint software. That said, if you are a TSG customer and you have system care throughout your estate, we can largely script the deployment of Sophos Central Endpoint and Intercept X, which should in most cases drastically reduce the time and hence the cost of that deployment. Make contact with your account director if you are a TSG customer. We'll evaluate what you need and let you know. And even if you're not a TSG customer, give us a ring. We'll ask you some questions, we'll figure out what you need, and we'll let you know how much it would cost to have Intercept X deployed on your network. There are other price bands available. There is a price band below 10 users and several price bands above the 100 user level. Worth stating at this point that if you are a TSG customer and you choose not to deploy Intercept X and you fall victim to a ransomware attack, any remedial action TSG are required to undertake will not be covered under your current system care contract and will be chargeable. This is not a change of policy for TSG. We've always said in the past that if you take our recommended security products, that is Sophos UTM Firewall, Sophos Endpoint and Semantic Email Security, that any malware attack will be covered under your contract. Ransomware is different, largely because ransomware attacks often involve some level of human interaction. As we saw earlier on, a spurious email. Because of that fact, we consider many of these ransomware attacks to be preventable. Therefore, if you choose not to deploy Intercept X to protect against these attacks and you do suffer a ransomware attack, as I said, any clear up will be chargeable. A recent TSG customer experienced a ransomware attack which took 3 TSG engineers 5 days to put right over 3 sites. Estimated cost of the clear up was £15,000, not to mention the cost and lost productivity as that client's systems were down for a large part of those 5 days. So better a bill for a couple of £1,000s to protect you for 3 years and get Intercept X in there than face a bill like that or larger. And as I said at the start, I was going to leave you with a real world example of what ransomware is capable of. This chap here in the middle is Ken Main of Ellen Conlon Hair and Beauty. They are a hairdressing salon in Glasgow, and his case made headlines a year or so back when they suffered via a spurious email, an invoice that came in over email, a ransomware attack which took down their entire network. Just to be absolutely clear, these guys are not a TSG client, but they chose to pay the €1,000 ransom that was demanded of them, and even at that, they only recovered somewhere in the region of 20% of their data. Estimated cost to his business for the whole attack, £20,000. An Intel security chief commenting on this exact case made the point that the UK is being targeted disproportionately when it comes to ransomware attacks compared to other European countries. The point we're trying to make here is that it would be a mistake to assume that you are too small to fall foul of such an attack. If a small hairdressing salon in Glasgow can be brought to its knees, there's nothing to say the same can't happen to you. I will leave you with some of Ken's choice words. I'm quite sure you can imagine how he felt. So what have we talked about today? We've talked about the need for a new approach in order to mitigate against these next generation threats. We've talked about what Intercept X can do to protect you against these next generation threats. And we've taken you through a short demonstration of the software in action. If you're a TSG customer and you want some more information or you want some pricing, give your account director a ring. If you're not a TSG client, go to the website, our contact details are there. Give us a call and we'll be happy to talk it over with you and help where we can. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. Bye bye now.